all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life, well, that's another, which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week to help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host, Brandon Beecham. I'm the reflection and extension of you who will be here each Wednesday interviewing a different consciousness changemaker. And on the other 4 weekdays, leading the way to ensure that your perspective is consistently expanded, your vibration is constantly elevated, and your heart is overflowing and full. Also, before we jump into today's episode, I'd like to take a moment to tell you about a few sponsors that not only help to make it possible to produce this show 5 days a week, but that I'm also genuinely passionate about promoting. Especially since they're helping to fund all the cool projects we have in the works, such as the Positive Head app, the docuseries that I'm intending to begin shooting within the next year, and whatever else we dream up over here at Positive Headquarters to help spread consciousness across the planet. Now, if you're short on time or just super excited for today's topic and want to dive right in and skip these ads, feel free to fast forward about
2.5 minutes
to get right into today's show. That being said, I strongly encourage you to listen because the reason I'm passionate about my sponsors is because they've made a huge impact in my own life, which is why I've aligned with these organizations. And I firmly believe they can do the same for you too. The first longtime stellar supporter of the show that I want to mention is Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online with over 8,000 video titles. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. The second sponsor I'm extremely passionate about promoting is Purium. The reason I've aligned Positive Head with Purium is because I wholeheartedly stand behind their mission to end human suffering by making superfoods easily available to everyone with the ultimate goal to help restore mankind's harmony with nature in the process. I mean, what a noble mission, right? It's no mystery that you need to bring your mind, body, and spirit into balance if a person truly intends to manifest the greatest and grandest version of themselves. And for me, for years, I honestly felt like I was ahead of the curve in the mind and spirit category, but I was only average at best in the level of care I administered to my body. Sure, I was healthy-ish when it came to the food I put into my system, but after doing a Purium 40-day transformation with a 10-day metabolic reset and cleanse, I can honestly say I have reestablished my relationship with food in a very positive way. Not only did I drop the extra weight that I was carrying as a natural byproduct of the transformation so that I'm now at my ideal body weight, but I continue to feel like my best self by starting every day with an organic Purium power shake that is made from raw superfood ingredients that were meticulously harvested, thoughtfully combined to optimize the nutritional impact it has on my body. I view the shake as plant medicine, really, and it happens to taste really delicious, and I can make it in about 30 seconds. There's actually 4 core Purium products that I take every day, and honestly, I intend to do so for the rest of my life for a very scientifically sound reason. And if you want to learn more about those reasons, you can go check out my video at positivehead.com/transformation, where I go into more detail. If you end up buying any of the Purium products, be sure and use the code POSITIVEHEAD, all one word, for a 25% discount. All right, all you positive heads, on this week's Powwow episode, I'm very excited to have Flow Master and Coach Oren Harris here with me on the show. Oren, welcome, my friend.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here, man. Good morning.
Been looking forward to this for quite some time. If I recall, I get connected with so many amazing people through the show. But if I recall, we were connected originally through the wonderful wizard himself, Daniel Raphael, right?
That is correct. The wizard himself.
The wonderful wizard of, I don't know if he's from Oz. I don't know where the guy's from.
Yeah, we're still trying to locate his home planet.
Exactly. Well, I'm very much looking forward to this, and I'm going to start off with my predictable starting question, and that is, you're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You got 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
My passion is helping people to awaken to their true self and express their God-given gifts and talents in the most profound, joyful, abundant, uplifting way possible.
I like the sound of this. This is going to be good. All right, let's dive into that. Let's dive into what that's all about. And the other thing I always like to do, Oren, is get a background on who I'm powwowing with, and just a little bit of your story. How did what's your story? What led you up to this point and to be doing that wonderful work that you're here doing?
Sure. So back when I was 4, growing
hey, I've had people start in the womb, so I have full recollection being in the womb. And
right. So it's chilling in the womb, right? And, no, I am. How I got into this line of work really is quite fascinating. It was unexpected. Nothing that I had ambitions towards as a child. Growing up in school and through high school, and even when I was in college, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do with my life. And I certainly wasn't completely connected to my life purpose. So I just experimented. When I was in school, I did pretty good in school, but I never really felt like I fit in. I didn't really learn how I actually learn until I got out of school. And so when I got out of school, I was coaching sports and teaching school, and that was going really well. And I basically fast forwarded to the end of my life and imagined myself sitting around with a group of my buddies, reminiscing about life and sitting there in regret, wondering, what if, oh man, I wish I would have tried this. I wish I would have done that. So this feeling of regret, just purely through my imagination, hit me. And I was like, wow, I do not, or actually I will not get to the end of my life and die with my soul's music, my gifts, or anything, left unsaid, undone. So I vowed to live my life as fully as possible. And that led me to retiring after 4 years of teaching and coaching when things were going really, really well. And I got into business and being an entrepreneur, which is something I was interested in. I tried out acting, which was also something that I was interested in because I knew I could always go back and teach. Anyway, so I was doing that. And then, so many events took place in that period of my life. But to condense it down, I essentially, my business was going pretty well at the time. My acting was going pretty well at the time. And I met this lady who was a very successful entrepreneur. And I asked her what her secret was, what she would attribute her business success to. She listed a bunch of things. And the last thing she said was her coach, her life coach. She said, hands down, that's been the most impactful thing on her business. And then I was like, oh, really? What is a life coach? What is that all about? And so she gives me his number. She said, check him out. He'll do a free consultation with you. I did that. I had a breakthrough and I started asking questions again, just like I did when I stopped teaching. And my primary question that I was living into and listening and exploring was, what am I really, 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 really here to do? What is it that only I can do? What is my unique contribution to this planet? And then I had a kind of revelation, and I realized that pretty much in my whole life, in one way or another, people were always drawn to me for guidance. even when I was a teenager and, being a little bit of a hellion and getting into trouble, I was like the oracle. When I had my business, I would be talking to customers on the phone. I had a moving company, and somehow we would wind up talking about their business or their relationship or their, and so that was a kind of revelation. And so then when I saw that there was this guy, this life coach guy, I was like, oh, here's a field that really directly expresses this particular gift. And so that's how I got into life coaching. And the way I got into speaking was I interviewed a really successful life coach, or had a 3-way call with a friend of mine who was a successful coach and another successful coach. And they basically said, if you're a really great speaker, then that's a great way to build your practice. And I went to Toastmasters, which is a public speaking organization. They teach you how to speak. I wrote out my first speech. I was prancing around my apartment, videoing myself, talking in the mirror, acting like I was on stage. And I got to this point before I ever did my first talk at Toastmasters. I was like, this is nerve-wracking. I don't really think I'm going to be a speaker, but I'm going to get it over with and do it anyway. Anyway, long story short, I did that talk and I got a standing ovation. So I was like, wow. I guess I can speak. So, and more importantly than that, I guess I can.
That was your
speak.
first speech and you got a standing ovation. That's pretty epic.
Yeah. And it was surreal because nobody really knew that I got to the point where I was like, you know what? F this. I'm not going to try to do a good talk. I'm just going to go up there, speak from my heart, be myself, and that will be my success. And so it came to me as quite a surprise that I got all this, all of these amazing accolades and compliments, and people were really moved. And just like the coaching, that was another kind of revelation, because I was like, okay, what just happened here? And I realized that by speaking from my heart and being willing to be vulnerable and just be myself, that in essence, I was speaking directly to other people's hearts, and I was speaking to their spirit. And I realized that everyone at the end of the day really just wants to be themselves, and that's what they were feeling. And so I decided to be a speaker. I never went back to Toastmasters. And one of the first things I decided to speak about was flow, which at the time I was saying the zone. Athletes talk about being in the zone. Nowadays, people more commonly talk about flow or flow states, because I recognize that when I was speaking, and the effortlessness and the grace and the timelessness and everything that I experienced that before in sports. And that was one of the first things I decided to start speaking about. So that's a really condensed version of like how I specifically got into this field as a transformation coach and speaker and thought leader, etc. But then I had many, many, many life events and critical life breakdown moments that were catalysts to spiritual awakenings. And that was happening in the same period of time as well.
Right. And that's sort of the way it seems to unfold for almost everyone is, breakdowns and breakthroughs coming simultaneously, hand in hand, right?
Exactly.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, this flow state and understanding the flow, because as you mentioned, it's sort of a buzzword and buzz concept that you hear a lot about. And, as someone who really puts a lot of focus on that, I'd love to hear from you first, understanding the flow. What does it mean to you? How does one get into the flow, etc.?
Sure. Well, one of my first understandings that came through observation is that I realized that whether I was speaking or in sports or in life, and in this flow and all the things that come along with being in the flow, like being in the right place at the right time, synchronicities happen. There tends to be a sense of effortlessness, ease, grace. So one of the things that I realized that was a common denominator in all flow experiences for myself, and also eventually with my clients and just hearing other people's stories is that there was little to no thought. So that was my first kind of flow hack, was that something about being in flow was connected to little to no thought. And this is why when people get interviewed about flow experiences, like let's just say an athlete's talking about an epic game that he or she had, and they say, so you scored 50 points, you were unstoppable out there. Like, what was going on in your mind? You know, more times than not, that'd be like, nothing. Right. And so when we get back into the mind and sort of reflect on our flow experiences and try to figure out, like, what did I do? That's the thing, is that the I, or in this case, we say the thinker, was chilling. It was not very active, right? And so that was one of my first realizations about flow, is that, you know, the thinking and the I, like the sense of self, the story of Oren, you know, which includes all of my beliefs, all of my history, all of my memories, all of the I kind of dissolves into, you could say, the bigger I, the infinite self, right? Which is connected to the universe and connected to all other beings. And so that was one of my first big realizations about the flow. And then they just continued to unfold, continued to happen. So I think that's a really good place to start, is understanding that we, and who we know ourselves to be, like the self that we can describe, right? Our name, our personality, our likes, our dislikes, our preferences, that I is not the one who, in a sense, gets into flow. If anything, somehow, some way, by wisdom, by intelligence, by accident, because the stars line up, somehow we get out of our own way. Right. And we, that sense of self, and therefore that sense of self-consciousness kind of dissolves. And that's when the you could say the greater self, or the universe, really opens up to reveal what's already happening, which is this extended awareness, this expanded consciousness, which is always existing. And, and it only seems magical to ourself, you know, and our mind and our understanding of, you know, things that we can understand. So I'm gonna go really down the rabbit hole for a moment here, and then we can get back to, like,
we like rabbit holes around here.
All right, so let's go down the rabbit hole. The challenge with hacking the flow, because there's a lot of flow hackers out there. I would consider myself to be a kind of flow hacker, right? You know, approaching the flow physiologically, biologically, neurologically, emotionally, all these different tools, techniques, philosophies, modalities. Really, it's just like we're all really trying to get more of this experience of the flow. But there's a fundamental realization that is beyond hacking the flow, and that is that we're not separate from the flow. That we're not separate from the flow, because if we start with the premise that the flow is something we are hacking into, it almost implies that it's separate from us, that we are hacking into it rather than it is us, or it is in us. And so it's more likened to a radio station. If you tune into, you know, 96.5 and they're playing classical, and you tune over to, you know, 100.3 and they're playing hip hop, you might like hip hop more than classical, or vice versa. And this is like when we like the flow, we actually love the flow. It's like, oh, I want to be on that station. But the real realization is that you are the one tuning the stations. You are the Wizard of Oz. You are consciousness. And when you realize that, then you can choose any station. So flow is actually a station. It's a state, flow state. It's a flow station. And the real power, yes, there's tremendous power when we're attuned to the flow, when we're tuned into that station, and all of the manifestational effects and all of the experiences that we love in the flow. Yes, that is extremely powerful. But the realization, which is where there's even more power, which is more of this kind of the source, is to realize that we as consciousness, unconditioned consciousness, is really where our power is. And that is like, would be the person who's actually tuning the station. So we can tune into any station. We can tune into joy, anger, frustration, flow, non-flow. So realizing, and this is what I realizing who I truly am when I'm in the flow and when I'm not in the flow, and realizing that the flow is not going anywhere.
Right.
What is a fundamental realization, even if you're a flow hacker, because if you, like I said, if we think that we're successfully hacking into something, and it implies that it can be gained and lost, and it can't.
Right. Right. It's like the Rumi quote. It makes me think of the Rumi quote. I'm sure you probably heard it before. You're not a drop in the ocean. You're the entire ocean in a drop. And when you start having that realization, or I think of a guest that I've had a few times on a few episodes now, Derek Rydall, who I really, really so enjoy his work, and definitely recommend you guys going back and checking him out. You can search Rydall. I don't have the episode numbers in front of me, but that's how you spell his last name if you go and search. And I think, the 3 times he's been on the show, he talks about, as opposed to the law of attraction, the law of emergence. And that is, it's like, it's already there. You don't need to attract or find this flow that is outside of yourself as much as create the right conditions, the right tuning to actually allow what's there to emerge, right?
Yes, and when we begin to do that consciously, then that's also when we awaken to the realization that we are actively participating with creation, that we're conscious creators. And that's the thing with flow. Sometimes it happens upon us accidentally. That's why we're hacking into it and trying to, decipher it and decode it. But if you look at, I'll just give another example here. If you look at falling in love, extreme sports, just as a second example, and let's say emergency as a third example. All 3 of these examples, like the emergency example would be the story we hear about the mom who's with her child and they get in a car accident, the car flips over and the child is trapped in the car. And so the mom has this, intense desire and intentionality to get the car, or to get the child out of the car, and channels this like superhuman type strength, this genius level capability, and all of these resources and capability to handle the task at hand. That's a kind of flow state that's induced by emergency, right? But it's the same with extreme sports. The thing about extreme sports and why extreme sports athletes experience a lot of flow is their life is on the line. They can't afford to be, thinking too much. If they're not present in the present moment, then they could die, right? So that type of conditions now sets them up to be more in the present moment and to experience more flow. Same thing with falling in love, right? When we fall in love, especially when we first fall in love, we kind of forget about ourselves, right? Yeah. And our heart is more open. And so what I'm pointing at is one of the common denominators in all 3 of those examples, and I could give more, is not so much what's happening in those examples, so much as where it takes us to. And there's a less of a sense of self. In the emergency example, we get snapped out of ourself because we have an intense desire and, no way to figure it out. And so it's like the self kind of just like, we just snap out of ourself, because our self is where all of our limitations are contained. Right. And so if we look at the common denominator in all of these types of flow experiences, kind of like I said, when there's little to no thought, this is another one. There's little to no self. And there's something that's having us slip more into the present moment, less in thinking, more in feeling, less in our limited, or less in the story of self, and more so in our natural state, or you could say our true self.
Right. And, you give some great examples there of what probably most listeners can relate to getting into, whether they've been in an emergency or played sports or fallen in love, and they're like, oh yeah, I think I know what I know what Oren's talking about. And one of the things that probably arises with that is, okay, but I'm not always going to fall in love. I stopped playing football, back in junior high, and, I'm married, and, I'm trying to reinvent this, but it's not like falling in love over and over again. So how do I get in this state again to create more, that magical state, flow state, or sort of miracle, zone, if you will?
Well, from the inside out, and when I say the inside out, the only thing really on the outside is just like life design, right? If we build our life and every aspect of our life more attuned to our authentic self, our true self, because when we're connected to our authenticity, then we're connected to our heart, and we're connected to our heart, we're connected to our spirit, and when we're connected to spirit, we're connected to the universe, and we're connected to the flow. And so, when we build our life, and I'm talking about our decisions, our vision, the way we set up our business, the way we set up our day to reflect the authenticity of who we are, to be in alignment with the authenticity of who we are, then we're creating less resistance to the true self, because that's what's happening when we're in the flow. We're more connected to our true nature. When I say our true nature, I mean who we are beyond the story of who we are, who we are in our essence. And so just by like life design, we can prioritize our actions and our decisions and align our life to be designed, just going back to what you said earlier about environment, setting up the environment of our life and the structures of our life to be more in alignment with our true self, because then we're creating less resistance, because the primary resistance that we have is the resistance between, who we think we should be and what we think we should be doing, and and the difference between that and who we really are, or the truth of the moment. You see what I'm saying?
Right,
and so that's, there's no one answer to the question, but that's something that is very doable, and that any of us can look at any point in our life and see, within our business, within our family, within, where we're giving our focus and our attention to, are these activities in alignment with our true self? Because if they are, then they're in alignment with abundance, and, also making sure that we're really living at the edge of our evolution, and our growth trajectory, because that's where a lot of our flow is. That's where a lot of the flow is. So a lot of times, we can experience flow and access flow by really stepping into whoever it is that we are becoming, or like you said, what Derek refers to as what is emerging, because that's where all the life force is. That's where the flow is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, one of the things that I also noticed you referencing recently was, of course, you just talked about abundance, but being an abundant minimalist, which I thought is a really interesting tying those two words together. And I think that sort of plays a part. A lot of times it's like getting into, because for a lot of people, what I think takes them out of the flow is they're looking to be an abundant, with three, mansions, double the cars of the neighbors next door, and you get into this sort of, how do I have so much stuff? And that's how I defined abundance. And then as a result, they get thrown out of flow because they're sort of on the wrong track with what they're pursuing or what their intention is. So, I'd like to hear your take on abundant minimalism and how that sort of ties in.
Sure. So the term came up recently, just very spontaneously, because
it's a good one.
I was remembering how I became a kind of minimalist. And I'll just tell the short story is I lived in an apartment complex years ago, and I had a storage unit, and it was separate from my apartment. And I had a bunch of stuff in there, and I moved out of the apartment complex. And a few months after I moved out of the apartment complex, I was like, oh crap, I forgot about all that stuff in my storage unit. Let me call the apartment complex. Anyway, I called them. Long story short, they were like, oh, Mr. Harris, we tried to reach you, which I had changed my number as well.
Oh, wow.
And they're like, oh, we're so sorry. We tried to reach you. We tried to hold on to your stuff. And so your stuff is gone.
Wow.
And this is when I had the realization. I was like, well, one, obviously I wasn't really missing the stuff because I forgot I even left it there. And then now that it was gone, after I started thinking about, oh my gosh, what was inside the storage? And I went through that, just kind of reflecting and remembering what was in there. And then very quickly went into a state of acceptance. I was like, well, it's gone. And then I started feeling a sense of deep peace around it. And then I felt a lightness in my being. Right. And then I just, from that lightness in my being and from that feeling, and it felt good and it felt free and it just felt right. I started living my life that way. And bit by bit, season by season, I would like trim things down. If I wasn't, like my clothes, for example, if I had clothes that were in my closet and I was like, oh, this is good, or I could use this someday, but I wasn't really wearing it, then I would get rid of it. And then I up my standard again from getting rid of stuff that I wasn't using to getting rid of stuff that I didn't love. And that's where the abundant part came in, because I'm like, okay, well, if I don't really love this and I'm a creator and I can have anything, I could choose anything, then why would I choose something just because I'm like, oh, it's good enough.
You're right.
I'd rather give it away to someone who's like, wow, I love this. Like, I really value this. And so that's where the abundance part came in. And the abundance is not so much about, because I think I might have referenced having fewer things, but also having things that are really, really nice. Yeah. Right. But it's less about the stuff and it being nice and more about being rooted in a state of abundance and the recognition that we can choose anything, and to see really what is it that's driving our choices. Like, why would I choose something that I'm like, oh, this is okay, or it's good enough? Maybe in some cases that's the most authentic choice, because I just don't care. It's like, okay, if it's good enough, if it works, fine. But in a lot of cases, if we truly were choosing from a place of infinite possibility and from a place of abundance, our choices might be different. And that's really how I started to tune that in. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to have a lot fewer things. But like, for example, you saw I've got these Beats headphones. I don't need $300 headphones, but I absolutely love music and I listen to music all the time. So that's put the two together. And that's how I came up with the abundant minimalist. But abundance itself, the state of abundance and the state of flow are almost synonymous.
Right. I love that. And it's so funny because literally within the last 3 days, I went through and I have a lot of clothes. I have a lot of stuff. And I went through and I was like, I'm not wearing any of this, half of it. And I it's really good stuff, but I'm not wearing it. So I literally went and pulled out all these pants and then took them to someone and said, hey, dude, any of these that you want, if they fit, otherwise let's find somewhere else. I'll find someone else to give them to. And, I learned that lesson. Well, I'm still learning it apparently, but first time I heard many years ago with a partner, she talked about, and in her case, it was coming from not having a lot of financial resources. She's like, going out and shopping for clothes or whatever. She goes, I only buy something if I absolutely love it. And doesn't matter about the deal. Doesn't matter about any of that. I've got to love it. And I can't say I've always stuck to that, but that idea has stuck with me. And, synchronistically, just a few days ago, it hit me. It's like, wow, look at all this stuff. Like, this could be being used. I'm never going to wear it. I'm never going to utilize this. And I think that's is such a powerful, and not only such a powerful thing to sort of move into that state that you've moved into, and that the universe sort of helped you along with your apartment situation. Right. But, even moving into the next stage of it, where it's something that you really love, and then giving that away in a moment where it feels in alignment. Like I've experienced that a few times. I have a story, and I told it not too long ago, and you could probably, I think if you search the magic jacket, it will come up as an episode where I had this jacket, and it's just a long story that's unfolded. I won't go into it all now. You can hear it in that episode. But where after having this jacket for like 10 years and all this sort of magic that happened around it, and having decided years ago that I'm going to let it travel and like let it go and let it do its thing and sort of have a way for people to document where it lands and everything. I had kind of put it on the back burner, forgot about it. And, you know, having come up with this concept 5 years ago in very dramatic fashion when I had a pretty magical event happen at a transformational festival. And then all of a sudden I wore it for the first time in years, like 6 months ago, and a person came up to me and was like, "That jacket, what's with that jacket? That's a future relic. What's with that?" Like, and I was like, oh, it's time to let it go now. This thing that I set in motion. And so it was an emotional process. The moment of like, this thing is like super magical to me. This person is obviously the one that's meant to have it next. Yes. And I let it go. And so what message am I sending to the universe in that moment? First, I want to co-create magic. Second, that I'm infinitely abundant and even something that I love. This person obviously is really connected to it as well and loving it as well. And I found that to be at the times where I've let something go, that I really, really love and value. Not just when it's like a magical kind of story like that one has around it, but other times there's something to that, and you're really tapping in, I believe, to a whole nother level of abundance. You're telling the universe you have it to give, right? It's flowing through you.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. And like imagine a world where, everybody's in that state and there's more of this flow, not like this is mine, this is yours, or there's this minimal amount of resources where things can just flow. I actually it's reminding me, I did an experiment with this a while back. This was sometime after the whole storage incident. And basically I had some stuff. I was doing one of my trim downs and I had this stuff in my closet and I was like, okay, I want to give this away. And I had that thought on 2 or 3 different occasions and I just didn't do it. And so I was like, okay, why am I actually not doing this? And I got past my mind's first responses, which is just like, oh, you're just being lazy or just procrastinating on it or whatever. I was like, okay, great. Hold on, mind. No, it's but really, why am I actually not doing it? And what would get me to do it? And then I simultaneously, I had this vision. I was like, wow, there's probably hundreds of thousands potentially of people who are in the exact same position that I'm in right now, is that they're giving people, they have stuff that's sitting in their house. They know intellectually they're smart enough to know they could just give it away or sell it or take some sort of action, but they're not doing it. So then I saw all this stuff and I'm like, it's not flowing. It's not circulating.
Yep.
So
stagnant.
It's stagnant. So
stagnant water.
Right. So I just, in hacking into that, I was like, okay, what would get me to move aside from the obvious, which is just like, the Nike approach, just do it. Right. And I said, I'm going to turn this into a game. And then I started realizing the nature of games are like in our DNA, like play is in our DNA. It's everything. So what I did was, and this is so like non-techy, but it was so effective. I created an email, and in the email, I taught a couple of principles, just very short. One of them was about abundance. And I said, nothing is missing, right? Nothing is missing. Just because it's not in our current frame of reality, it's not actually missing, right? We just have to tune into it. So that was one principle. And the other principle was instant manifestation. And then, and I wrote 2 paragraphs about that. And I said, so here's the deal. I have this list of 10 things that I have that I want to give away. And here's 10 things that I want. And I sent it out to maybe 50 people. And I said, I want everyone to make these 2 lists. Because I was like, this is going to be crazy. This was my intuition. I was like, this is going to be crazy. And it's going to get people to experience this instant manifestation principle and this principle that nothing's actually missing. And so basically what happened, and this went on for like weeks, is that maybe number 2 on my list, I've got a pair of AirPods that I'm going to give away, was number 1 on someone else's want list. And so all of these people, this circulation happened, and people were mailing stuff to people. People were looking in their inbox and like, wow, the thing I wanted, someone else has it. The thing that somebody else want, I have. Wow. And all of this movement happened, and people were like, "Oh my God, Oren, this is genius! This is brilliant!
It is genius!"
And thank you. And it just reaffirmed, well, several things. One is that I was like, the real genius in it was I tapped into something that already existed inside of us, which was the desire to give, the capability to give, and the resources to give. And I made it into a game, and I tied community into it, and I just tied these things that were already existing together. And that's what got the energy in motion, right? Is because I changed the energy around it and got the emotion around giving, and got people to tune into that. And then once they started experiencing it, I kind of knew that it was going to catch on inside of them. Be like, oh, wow, I get to just send this thing and give this thing to this human being that I can connect to that really wants it. Dude, it went on for weeks. Wow. And it very much illustrates what we're talking about. And if you imagine it as this circulation, it's like, that's how the flow works. That's how the universe works. And that's how abundance works. So if we have a society, a world where everyone's, not looking at things in terms of like, okay, these are my resources, these are yours, and looking at it more as a flow. I mean, imagine implementing that principle, on a mass level.
Yeah, I feel like that's the future of our planet, really. And it really illustrates, first off, I think it would be wonderful if you or someone created a broader way to do that very thing, like, website or whatever. I mean, I'm sure you've thought of this, and others that participated probably were like, you have to do this. I mean, it's such a wonderful, beautiful idea. But what I love is how it illustrates what I know to be so, and that is we are sort of each other's missing puzzle pieces and each other's medicine, and we all come to the board, come to the game to say, okay, I'm this piece of the puzzle, and I know I fit, somewhere, and at different times I connect in this way and that way with this piece and that piece, and I have a gift here and they have medicine for me, and it's such a beautiful reflection of that truth, as far as I'm concerned, that, it's all there waiting for us to get out of this separation mentality that we've been programmed into, and to reprogram ourselves into realizing, okay, cool. What's good for Oren is good for me, because literally the separation between us is illusory, and that is me in another form. And so let's see, what do we have that can benefit one another? And what happens is the sum becomes so much greater than the equal parts, right?
Totally. And it made me think of even in sports, right? Because when you're in flow, in the zone, as it were, in sports, you're not really thinking about the other person losing. It's not win-lose. Now, in a performance arena like sports, you may be playing with intention to score the ball, intention to win. But when you're really, really in the flow in sports, and I know this is how it is for me, you're not thinking, okay, I want to win and I want you to lose. And so you're still in somewhat of a state of unity and a state of harmony and a state of alignment with the universe. Right. And so the reason it might look supernatural in sports sometimes is because when you're in alignment with universe, you have expanded consciousness, you have expanded awareness, you've expanded senses. And so what that looks like on a playing field is it looks like, you're extraordinary, or psychic, or like, wow, how did I know, this guy know where the ball was going to go before it was thrown? These types of things are really natural abilities that we have. But what I'm pointing at is that when we're really, really in that flow state, is the I and the separate sense of self has kind of dissolved, right? And so all of this intelligence and information and awareness and capability just naturally expands. And in sports, it just looks like, wow, this guy's kicking ass right now. He's like playing, this exceptional, beyond his skill level, maybe even. So,
right.
But there's no win. You're not in the consciousness of win lose. Right.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And it's like, and really you can look at it from a broader perspective of like, okay, the opposing team is really just, there to allow me something to play off of. They're challenging me to rise to my greatest potential, to be able to make the three-pointer as I fade into the sideline, on one leg or whatever. It's like, well, you need that. You need that other person there to team to sort of challenge you and call forth your greatness. And it makes me think of the one of my favorite quotes is smooth seas never made for a skilled sailor, right? It's like they're helping you to sharpen your axe, really, in that scenario, right?
Yeah, and when you're really in that state of unity within yourself, then you want the other player to be their best as well.
Yeah. It's like as a little kid, how you get mad if someone like your parent is like not playing their hardest or whatever. Right. I don't. No, that's not a fun win. You're like letting me win. I want to win. When you're at your best.
Right. Which is definitely, looking at another flow. If we look at flow in terms of principles or things that can induce flow, is challenge level. When we have a challenge level that takes us beyond our current familiarity with our ability, our familiarity with our skill set, then that can actually be a flow trigger simply because the challenge level is calling forth more through you. Right. And so if it's something I've never really done before, or I'm playing on a new level or with a new level of competition, then, all of my sort of contained memory of my skill set and everything like that I might just be resting in kind of goes by the wayside. And, this it's like the challenge itself pulls forth another level of energy and ability moving through me. And that is one way to create flow. And in fact, some people who are really look at flow from a more scientific perspective will say that, you have to have a high enough challenge level, right? But I would say that I would only add to that is to understand why that is. It's because a high enough challenge level or a big enough vision, right, is another way to look at it. Like if you have a vision that you're devoted to, whether it's your kids or saving the planet, and yourself, if it's way beyond yourself, then the vision itself can serve as the catalyst at times to get you beyond yourself, because you don't have the wherewithal of your own intellect and your own ability to actually accomplish the mission. And so then that opens you up. And I think the key there is that you are committed or devoted to that, whatever it is, that mission, that game, that whatever it is, because then life can flow through you and more. Yeah, it draws forth more through you. So that's, I guess I'm saying that too, that if you want to put flow into more of a formulaic type of thing, then that's something that is very doable, choose goals, intentions, desires, missions, games that are beyond your current comfortable known level of ability, but that you feel a true resonance with.
Right. That brings in the whole authenticity piece, and like, only following something that's like your highest excitement. It feels authentic to you. Those are such important pieces, like to always check in with yourself. Like, okay, is this really, and is it pushing me to my edge? Right. And, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt said, do something every day that makes you uncomfortable or something.
Right,
paraphrasing,
that scares you.
Like, yeah. And that's, it's so good. 'Cause it's like, okay, a little bit further. We're all just here expanding. All right. Well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting this podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you an example, on the show Missing Links, the incredible researcher Greg Braden explores all the biggest questions concerning who we are, where we come from, where we're going, by connecting the missing links between science and spirituality to complete our understanding of humanity's history and to better understand the interconnectedness of all things. Awesome, right? And that's just one example. As you guys constantly hear me say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. You know, another thing that I saw you makes me think of that I saw you speak on was you were talking about believing, versus knowing, and sort of the difference between those two things, and that sort of becomes a part of this process too, as we become, expand into our next greatest and greatest version of ourselves over and over again. It's like I'd like to hear you maybe expand on that a little bit, because it was really interesting, the talk that I heard.
Sure. It's talking about the difference between understanding, knowing, I think I might have said believing, right? Understanding, believing, knowing, and being. And right. Really, you can look at it as a kind of trajectory of progress, right? So understanding something intellectually has its usefulness. It has its value. There is a kind of power. They say, knowledge is power, right? But then applied knowledge is even more powerful, right? Because now you're applying it, and now you're getting an experience. And from that feeling that you have from having an experience, that now starts to move you into knowing, right? So there's that type of knowing, which is like, okay, no, I know this works. I'm not just talking about flow. I'm talking about it from a place of knowing because I experienced it. So that's the vibration of knowing, and it's much, much, much stronger than just understanding something. And then there's also our inner knowing, which is just intuitive intelligence that we may not even be able to explain how we know, but it's just kind of an inner knowing. It's like it resonates somewhere inside of us. So it's basically saying that knowing is much, much more powerful than just understanding. But going beyond knowing is being or embodiment. And this is where you really become integrated in your knowing. And one of the ways that you can integrate your knowing is that you're living it, right? You're speaking it. You're making the decisions from your knowing. Let's just say your intuition, or just something that you inherently know. When you start to think and act and decide from what you know, then you integrate that knowledge, that knowing becomes integrated. And so what I'm saying is that just like there's a big difference between understanding and knowing, there's a big difference there's another level up between knowing and being. Right. And so when we act on what we know, we kind of ground that circuit. And I also think this is really valuable to look at in terms of like those of us that are exploring like higher consciousness, altered states of consciousness, is that it's one thing to expand into a state of consciousness, and you might be like, okay, this is very valuable on all levels of my life. But to me, what's just as important and maybe even more exciting is that you normalize it, right? And it becomes a stage of consciousness and not just a state. And for it to become a stage, which becomes a more of your new baseline, right? And then this integration of the state of consciousness is important. Otherwise, I shouldn't say that it's not otherwise useful, because obviously, if you have an experience in consciousness and expanded consciousness, that has value just in and of itself. But to me, it's like, okay, how do you integrate that? And you integrate it through your actions, through your decisions, through structuring your life around that state of consciousness, then it becomes more normal rather than just more, randomized or more sporadic kind of state, like that you just have access to. So like, I'll give you an example. For me, when I started speaking, I told you how I started speaking, and I had a flow experience. The reason that I consistently, for the next, 12, 13 years, experienced that in speaking is because I integrated, and I basically decided that that's how I'm going to speak, not speak amazingly, because that's a result, but to speak from this place of my true self. And so that decision to do so is a type of integration that makes it that more consistent. If that makes any sense, and instead of my mind or my ego coming in and going, oh my God, people thought I was amazing. Let me see if I can do that again. I didn't. I was like, it doesn't matter what people think. What matters is that I speak from my heart. And so I simplified it. But what I'm saying is that allowed me to integrate that state of consciousness, that state of fluidity, was integrated by me deciding that I was going to give my devotion to my heart, to my soul, to my true self, and to speak from that place and have that be my goal rather than doing a good talk. Right. Yeah. And so the net result of that is that I've been speaking for years now with no notes for hours on video, on stage, and consistently in flow. But that's a matter of integration. And that's where the concept, the information, the knowledge disappears, and you embody it. It becomes, you become the living knowledge.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well said. And, that sort of leads to a conversation of, for me, I know it's one that's you're interested in, just like I am, the evolution of our consciousness, human consciousness in general.
Yes,
and I feel like that is a big part of the puzzle, is like, as we sort of stretch our boundaries, and maybe at one point in time, getting on the stage and speaking was like, I don't know if I can do this. I'm not good at it too. Okay. Right. Now I've integrated this, and this is your new norm. And this sort of process seems to go on and on, right? And so I'm curious, as we continue to stretch, as humanity stretches, and then of course you also have retraction at times. It's this idea that evolution can be a spiral, right? We circle back on things that we think we've gotten past for further integration and clarification, and clear out the cobwebs that we didn't see the first time around, or what have you. Where do you think this is all going? I mean, what do you think about the current state of the world and the evolution of human consciousness at this point in time?
So I feel like we're moving into living in more of a state of unity, living like a good example. I see the image of a flock of birds that are flying together. They're able to fly separately, but they can fly together as many bodies, but one mind, one consciousness, and they do it effortlessly and seamlessly and with beauty and with grace. I feel like that's one of the places that we are going as humanity. And so, if we start to look at unity, moving towards unity versus separation, then we can look at like, what are the implications of that? And one of them would be like, kind of like we were talking about earlier when I said, giving stuff away, stuff that you're not using, and like this circulation. Well, there's a circulation of knowledge, a circulation of ideas. We're going to be able to operate, not going to be able to, we're already doing it, right? It's just becoming more conscious of it, to operate more as like the birds do, like as a group mind, right? As a more unified society. And that has so many applications and so many ways that we can look at that. One of them, like I said, is group knowledge. There's a show, I haven't seen enough of it to speak that intelligently about it, but it's called Sense8. Have you seen that one?
Oh, yeah, I have. It's wonderful.
Yeah. So that to me is an example of something that I experience now. And I know certain people probably do consciously or unconsciously, but that type of thing where they're accessing each other's gifts. It's like, oh, my gift, your gift, even our gifts, because we're one in consciousness, we'll be able to access each other's gifts, each other's knowledge, or just the knowledge of the universe itself. And so, that's part of the evolution. And there's many things that are contributing to this. One, I would say, is that we need to evolve more collectively from the information age, right? Not to get rid of information, but we're still in the collective consciousness, really knee deep in the information age, and it's serving as a tremendous asset to us. And with technology, we have distribution of information and have information so easily accessible to us. And it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, it's amazing and it's moving us forward. And on the other hand,
still
it's
that knowing, right? Like you're talking about earlier.
It's putting too much in our heads. You know what I mean? We're relying too much on our intellect. And the thing about it is that, in the world we actually live in right now, and the speed of change and the speed of evolution and the depth of everything that's happening, if we're operating primarily from intellectual consciousness and from this sense of self and from, what we know, then we're going to experience a lot of unnecessary suffering, because we can't navigate through the sea of information and through the speed of change effectively enough, just as by ourselves or within our own intellect. And so this is where, the information age now really gives rise to the intuition age, or the inspiration age, or the imagination age, because then we can live much more fluidly, much more multidimensionally in this reality, instead of operating exclusively, like I said, on intellectual consciousness or linear based thinking, when that's not really the world that we live in. And so these are things I see. These are things I see in human evolution. And eventually, this type of conversation has gone from being a little bit more, compartmentalized, or, on podcasts like this. Eventually, the rest of the world is starting to see, okay, what we're doing is actually not working, and so then, and this is what happens, I think, with evolution, is that, there's just like when a new idea comes to market, there's the early adopters, right? And then there's the people that catch on later. And so I feel like eventually things like inspiration and intuition and even flow, which, is going to be not only necessary for us to thrive in the world that we live in, but it's going to be necessary at some point for us to just be able to survive.
Right. So it becomes a foundational requirement of the new world, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. And one other piece of that, of us coming and living more in unity, which is one of the things I see in the evolution of human consciousness, is transparency. Transparency, because everything in consciousness is transparent. And this is why there's like levels of consciousness, and there's information and at various levels of consciousness that we all have access to. And so as we are dissolving the barriers of separation amongst us, or the barriers within ourselves that are, being perpetuated by fear and judgment and shame and things of these natures, as we're healing that, and we're becoming essentially more transparent to ourselves, and our subconscious is becoming more conscious, which is giving us more access to super consciousness and this field of unity where we're all connected. And so all of this information and this knowing that is in our consciousness becomes more alive in our awareness. And so this is why things like telepathy eventually will be normal, and and maybe even more importantly, reliable. Like telepathy right now is not a reliable human technology, because we're still sifting through a fair amount of distortion and separation and things like shame and judgment. And so it's not the information, which we all have access to, is not always lucid and clear and coherent, but the information is present. Like, so these are things I see in where we're going, and I mean, really where we are now, but where we're evolving to as we're, dissolving internal barriers and external barriers of separation from each other, separation from source.
Yep. Yeah, it's fascinating when you think about, and it's easy to see in retrospect if you look back at, the 1700s, for example, just to name one. It's like, oh, that was a moment, these like powdered wigs and whatever was happening, and that's just in one area of the world at that time. But, it's like it was a blip. Or you look back to the early 1900s, you look back to, any different time period. They're really just moments in time that are like,
right.
We look back on look at the hair and the music in the 80s, or it's like, and it's really fascinating because I think sometimes we forget that we are on this moving train, and all of these moments and what is the quote unquote norm now, is like, can you imagine there was a world not so long ago that you didn't have all knowledge on your, in your pocket? Like speaking of information and the flow of it, it's like, what a shift some of these things.
Right.
And they're just, it's like you turn these corners and all of a sudden the old world is like so far behind. And I feel like you're absolutely right. I feel like there's also a quickening happening where there's a speeding up where, it takes for a very long time for 1 to turn to 2, but then 2 turns to 4, and then 4 turns to 8, to, and you get this exponential growth that happens. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Waking Life.
Is it the animated movie? I saw it years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. It was amazing.
So awesome. Richard Linklater, one of my favorites, and directors, and it's basically all about astral projection and out of body experience. And there's this one scene in there, I don't know if you recall it or not, where the guy's talking. He talks about this very thing, how it took from recorded history as far back as we know, 10,000 years recorded history or whatever. It took a long time to get up to the Dark Ages, right? 1,000 years or whatever ago. But then, that was, let's say that's a 9,000 year journey. Then it took from there to the Industrial Revolution, well, much less time, 1,700 years, right? And then from the Industrial Revolution up to the the modern age, well, that was just a couple hundred years. And then you have this quickening happening. And now it's like, what he was basically saying is what's going to happen is evolutions that happen in an afternoon that would have taken 1 billion years. And,
nice. Yes.
Yeah. And that's like, whoa, you start thinking about that sort of growth. And it's like, and change and transformation, it's like, buckle up your seatbelt. The one thing you can guarantee is that change is guaranteed, and find your center and move from just knowing to being, and trusting there, it's like that ability to jump off the cliff and know that the net doesn't appear until you jump, right? It's like, and so getting into that state, I feel like that space is the only thing that we can really do to prepare ourselves. Is like, okay, I don't know. All I know is there's something bigger than self. I'm connected to it and I trust it. And, and now let me free fall into it.
Totally. And keep free falling. I feel like if you keep free falling and then you leap and then that will appear, leap and that will appear, eventually you stop looking for the net to appear and you realize that you have wings and you can fly, right?
Yeah.
You realize that. And this is the same kind of analogy, or the thing I started out with in the beginning of this conversation about the flow. Eventually we realize deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And this is beyond information. It's realization that we're not actually separate from the flow. Right. And so it's the same thing with it's the self that's leaping going, oh, I hope I don't die. You know what I mean? But it's like, if we keep leaping, and two things, one, either like the net appears and we're like, oh, wow, everything worked out the way I wanted it to. There's that type of realization that builds this faith. And then there's also like, okay, we leap and we're like, we die, metaphorically speaking, like, okay, we leapt into a relationship and we gave it everything we have, and then we got our heart broken. There's another type of awakening that can happen with that, where, you know, we die essentially, and then we resurrect and we realize, wow, I'm still here. Right. Which then starts to loosen up our fear of death, because the fear of death is connected to the limited perception of self.
Yeah, it's transformation. And you know, it's oftentimes, I saw a quote not too long ago, and I wish I'd saved it, because the person basically said something to the effect of, I look at, you know, so many cases where, you know, when something old dies, in a sense, it becomes even more. So why would I fear death? It's like, you know, the caterpillar to the butterfly, the dragonfly, you know, there's so many things that, you know, will sort of die in one form, and then they come back even greater than they were before. And if you sort of trust that process of your own evolution, I feel like it's, it brings great comfort in, you know, you see the beauty of it all.
Totally. You know what I thought about when you're talking about the quickening and the acceleration of evolution, and how even like the internet, like it seems like it's been part of our lives, our whole lives, but we look back, it's like, wait a minute, it's like it snuck up on us, right? It's like, wait a minute, now here we are, we're here, and we got this sensation like we've always been here, even though we haven't. You know, it'd be cool is to do some type of like a video of the future now, and maybe it's a kid talking to their grandfather, and they're like in disbelief of Earth's history, you know, and maybe I'm totally making this up. Maybe like they're having a conversation, like, you know, Granddad, is it true people used to, there's this thing called money, you know, where people used to like hurt each other or kill each other, you know, but just like, if it could be portrayed in a way of like, almost like they can't fathom it, you know.
I think that
would be a really amazing, something to portray, like visually, or like in a short 5-minute something.
Wonderful, you know, idea.
Yeah, you know, and we could talk about money, we could talk about, you know, war, all these things that are now, from that future now point of view, like so far back in history that it's almost like an urban myth, you know, almost like makes you know what I mean, like you know, but there's the elder in the scene, or somebody that has recollection. There's like, people used to do that. Like, why would people work for money? Like, what? That's weird.
Yeah. People actually used to judge each other based off of skin color, or they actually thought they were separate. Like, isn't that hilarious?
Like,
they didn't know. Like,
yeah, be like, is that really true, Grandpa? Like, oh yes, I know, it seems unbelievable, but
we were dumb animals.
We were, but yeah.
It's funny, man. Yeah, no, you know, what's great about that sort of thing too, what I love about that is it's like, you're sort of like, you talked about, you know, we've been talking about playing with, you know, the universe in this co-creative way. What are you doing if you create something like that? You're playing with that version of reality, a timeline where that truly is you know, it's a real thing, right? You're calling it in.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, we got another project on the to-do list.
We got to put, with that, and we got to upgrade the giving game thing that I told you about earlier. Use some real technology behind it, because I literally just like, I mean, this was years ago. I hit reply all, so it was a looking at today's technology, it's a ghetto way of doing it, but it still was very effective with like low end, you know, low end technology. It still was super effective. So, but that idea and this one, because you're right. It's like, oh man, that's a clever, creative idea. That feels fun. But see, the very fact that we're feeling it and we're like, wow, and we're talking about it and we're acting it out, even you and I right now, we're literally creating it.
Yep. We're swimming in the vibrational pool of that reality, that timeline, that like we're literally like stepping into that, you know, if you imagine having all these roads in front of you, which one can you step onto and walk down all these different paths? You're literally saying, oh, I'm choosing this one. You're resonating with it. It's it's such a beautiful process. I think people would really trip out if they understood. I've heard Bashar talk about this before, how you're just sifting timelines constantly with the vibration that you're offering. And it seems seamless to you, but to all of us. But if you could see how much you're like sort of choosing with your vibration, you would be sort of dumbfounded.
Yeah. Dumbfounded, stupefied, mind blown. Yeah, for sure. You can actually see it and see the effects of it.
Right.
I totally agree. 100%.
Well, man, I can't believe we're getting already down to it here. This has been so epic, Oren, but I do have a couple other things that I want to bring up. And one is, as we talked about the evolution of human consciousness, one that seems to be popping up a lot, and I saw that you spoke on as well, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it a bit, is this whole idea of as we step up our evolution, one of the key things that seem to be wanting to be healed at this point in time is the masculine heart. This relationship with the masculine energy and what it's done on our planet, and I'd love to hear your insight into that.
Yeah, well, first of all, we have collectively, and I'm just saying this from a point of us taking responsibility, we've collectively created into our evolution a significant imbalance in our world in, in masculine and feminine energy, in terms of how we're valuing it, in terms of its usefulness, in terms of us, recognizing it as a kind of power. Right. A kind of creative power. And so this, gave rise early on to feminine movements and equality. And so we've moved from this suppression of the feminine energy, and also specifically women, even though we all have masculine and feminine energy. Right. And then, through these different movements and declarations and actions and missions and all these different things, now we're in a completely different place where, women are in position of leaderships, the family structure in the households, all of that has changed, but the feminine energy is still on the rise. Right. And so, and I mentioned the feminine energy because you asked me about masculine energy, is because as we're coming into balance with the feminine, we're also like healing the masculine and upgrading the masculine energy. Right. And how it gets expressed through us. And as an example, there's like an ego level of masculine energy. And then if you expand beyond the ego or the self, if you start to expand beyond the ego or the self, then we move into what I would say is like more like divine masculine, where you are, accessing more of the divine and, more of a pure masculine energy, and then awakened masculine, which is essentially just saying that you've to a large degree transcended the self. And now you're able to operate and utilize this energy, this masculine energy, which, in terms of like creative energy, focused, intention, and all of the things that we associate with masculine energy, they just get upgraded in terms of their power because they're no longer as limited by the self. So like if you go back to ego masculine energy, it's about I. So if I utilize my masculine energy in terms of being a creator or a protector or a provider or all these different expressions of masculine energy, when I'm in that stage of masculine energy, a lot of it's getting filtered through the ego or through the self. And so there's a sense of pride. Right. And that's why it's like, okay, I'm the one doing this. Right. So all of this, you can draw a lot of power from that, and you can create a lot in the world, but it's also extremely limiting because it's limited to just you. Right. And so all of this extra intelligence and resource and really masculine energy that could be flowing through you from your extended resources from the universe and from, all of your teammates, gets blocked out when you're like, I have to be the one, I'm the protector. I'm doing this of my own intelligence and my own intellect and my own skills. So as you expand, that's one of the ways that's explaining that you expand more out of the self, and then you move into a more pure divine will and masculine energy. Does that make sense? And so
for sure,
the level of power increases. And one of the things that's key to this happening is the heart. Right? Because that's one of the parts of the masculine energy that we've not given much attention to. Right. And especially if we've been playing in these roles of this is what a man's supposed to do, and this is what a man looks like, then it's kind of, to a large degree, cut off some of our feminine energy and our feeling centers, right? Which is where a lot of our power is.
Yep.
And so I feel like, the expansion and evolution of the masculine energy right now is largely happening by a healing of the masculine heart, which also then simultaneously opens you up to the feminine, and ultimately to integrating more integrated states, where the feminine and masculine are married inside of us. So I said a lot there in just a few words. I'm just kind of giving a really broad stroke.
Yeah, it's
but it's essential right now. And one of the ways that it's translating in so many different ways, right? Like even in our business, in our businesses, how much we're relying just on what is known and on. It's like we've over relied on the masculine and we've downplayed the feminine in so many areas of our life. And I'm just using business as an example because it's such
a good reflection of our planet, though,
Yeah,
how the business world is run.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, say more about that because I agree.
Yeah. Well, it's first off, you touched on moving into the heart more, and I think it's such a huge part of the evolution of masculine. And I had a guest on not too long ago who's an intuitive, and it stuck with me, and I've mentioned it multiple times on the show since. This is a couple years ago, and she was like, Brandon, a lot of your, and I've had some good success in business, and I've done some pretty cool things in that realm, and success with this podcast, and certainly a lot of failures too. But one of the things that she said is all the success that I have in life comes from my healthy balance of masculine and feminine. And that really resonated with me. And then she went on to say, and by the way, take a look at your lineage, look at your ancestors, go back a generation, 2 generations. It's like the masculine was like this very one-dimensional thing, and obviously not stereotyping. There's exceptions everywhere, but generally speaking, man, you're a man's man, and you don't cry, and you don't, feelings are this thing that you repress, and meanwhile, the real power is moving into the heart and having the healthy balance of both masculine. And then we've had it where a lot of women, to try and compete and survive in this world, have sort of suppressed their femininity and overcompensated with all this masculine energy just as a survival mechanism. And so the world has been so dominated by masculine energy for so long, and I believe a big part of the shift that we're going through, and even what a lot of the ancient cultures predicted, like the Mayans and what have you, is this, okay, we're moving into where the feminine takes its power back. It's like coming back into it doesn't mean swing too hard the other way and we just persecute anything that's masculine, but really finding that balance and bringing that to business and to the world stage in general. How do we inject more heart into everything that we're doing, and really understanding that the heart is meant to be the sort of, not the mind so much. The heart is really meant to be, steering the ship, and then using your brain, your mind for things where that's necessary, but letting that heart-centered energy. It's an interesting thing, right? We all think of our being, we think of living in this, the skull behind our eyes, right? That's me. That's where I'm at. When really, if you move down into into the heart center, and that's where you're emanating from. And it's a whole different way of interacting with the world that I think is where all the healing and balance is going to come from.
I totally agree. And then the mind and the body can be servant to the heart and the spirit.
Yes.
Right? Because that's where the power is. That's where the clarity of our intentions are. That's where, and I think that's, that hierarchy, or maybe not a hierarchy, but that kind of chain of command is really,
natural order.
The natural order, right? It's like the heart is the captain, and the mind and the body are like crew, you know what I mean? They can operate together. One other thing I see that's interesting that's happening with the masculine energy is this fire energy inside of us. If you want to associate it with like masculine, this fire, dragon, lion type of energy. One of the things that I've worked with a few clients on that are high performers and just really, really living at their edge is this kind of almost like suppression that is really ultimately, let's see, how do I say this? So I helped a client with this recently, right? And one of the things I helped him with is to see how he was, in his attempt to be loving and kind and harmonious, he was actually, without realizing it, suppressing and in a little bit of fear of his internal fire.
Yep.
And I feel like this is really
swinging the other way too hard, right?
It's swinging the other way too hard. And I said, you've got this nice guy thing. And he's like, well, I'm a nice guy. I said, well, you are a nice guy in your heart, but you're also trying to be a nice guy, which is an indicator that you're in some sort of fear within yourself, right? And so what he was awakened to, and I call it awakened masculine, is that, what does it look like when you are an embodiment of truth? Then you also are simultaneously a space of love and harmony and abundance, right? And so in your fear, which is what's creating this aspect of you that we're calling the nice guy, you're afraid that you might be perceived as not loving, not caring, an asshole or whatever. I said, but that's fear. And so you're compensating for that by being a nice guy, and you're not being 100% authentic. Right. And so what you're not completely aware of is that you can be the full expression and authenticity of the truth that's in your heart, which by virtue of it being the truth in your heart cannot harm another, but it is and can be disruptive, but it's disruptive to the illusion. It's disruptive to something that's not true. But I think we're misguided to perceive that that's not love. That actually is, right? And so what he got to see was this higher level of union between being both strong and fierce, but simultaneously abundant and loving. And in fact, I would say you can only actually be loving when you're being authentic and truthful. So this feels really relevant, and it feels like that we're going through kind of a fear of our own power. And so then we try to control that fire. And even when we try to control it, with positive intention, ultimately, I think we need to move from controlling, avoiding, and managing into transformation. And that's where the healing happens. That's where, love comes in. So take something like the frequency of anger. Maybe in certain societal situations, it's beneficial temporarily to control your anger and not to be violent towards someone. But ultimately, that frequency is trying to be transmuted, and it gets transmuted through love. And then that energy becomes this pure masculine, creative energy that can be used towards creation. Does that make sense? Oh,
for sure. Yeah. And it's, it makes me think the most important thing as we try and find this balance in ourselves is, for everyone out there, men who are, like, okay, yeah, I'm really working on that part of myself and finding the balance with my feminine energy, or women like, okay, yeah, I've been overcompensating and sort of have repressed this, divine femininity, and I'm trying to find balance again. It's like, most important thing is always checking in with yourself, and, in that process, don't become the nice guy at the expense of being cruel to yourself, right? That's the greatest sin you can commit, is against yourself and not honoring yourself. Because if you're not honoring yourself just to be the nice guy or whatever, then you're disempowering everyone involved in the scenario, because you're disempowering yourself. So what can the results of that be? Yeah,
and so really you're actually not even being nice then, right?
Right.
Because if we negate ourselves, right, in an effort to create harmony, we can't create harmony from a place of disharmony. We can't create love from a place of not loving. And so if we are not loving ourselves enough to be in harmony with ourselves and our own truth and our own heart, then if we then try to express and try to create harmony or be nice to someone else, then it's really a false version of that, because we can't truly honor someone else in their heart and in their truth, which is where the harmony exists, where the connection exists, if we're disconnected from ourselves. So it doesn't work anyway. What I mean? So our best shot at even creating harmony and union and all these things with another person is through our own connection with ourselves and being in harmony with ourselves. And then we're in honor and respect of ourselves. And then from that place, we have the best chance of creating that dynamic with another person.
Absolutely. Well said. One last thing I'd like to hear from you, if you got something good for me, Oren. I love stories of synchronicity, serendipity, a positive paranormal story, anything magical up your sleeve you care to share?
Oh man, I've got more stories than I could ever remember.
If I had a nickel for every time I heard that, I think that speaks volumes about the type of people I have on my show, because that's almost always the response. Like, wow, where do I begin? There's so many, Yeah.
So I'll share a few stories just in one story.
Excellent.
So a little while back, I was dating this girl, and we planned this vacation to go to the Bahamas with a kind of like a group vacation. And we planned it months ahead, and we wound up breaking up. And then she decided really, and I just agreed to it, that we would stay in different rooms since we weren't together. I was like, okay, cool. So I decided to stay with one of my buddies. Long story short, we get to the resort, and we'd gotten back together. Right.
Oh, wow.
Before the vacation. So now we're at the resort. She's like, oh, we're in different rooms. This sucks. And so we're trying to coordinate things like breakfast, lunch, because we didn't have cell phone service. And I said to her one day, I was like, I don't really feel inspired to coordinate right now.
Yeah.
I said, she's like, well, then how are we going to have lunch? I was like, oh, I'll find you. And she's like, Oren, there's thousands of people here. I was like, I'll be there. I'll be there.
Yep.
Anyway, long story short, I was with my buddy. We're exploring. I mean, this place is massive, right? It's like a city. And as soon as it was lunchtime or around lunchtime, and the inspiration hit, without even looking for her, we just like walked and were just like guided. And then boom, she was right there. And so then I shared that story. Yeah, I shared that story with a friend of mine in New York. She was like, but how? And I said, well, we have this internal GPS system. And by the way, one of the reasons I'm inspired to share this story out of my list of countless stories is because one of my missions, in a sense, is to bring heaven to earth, to make the supernatural natural, and to make the super normal like normal and more integrated part of our world. And so I shared this with my friend in New York. And she was like, wow, like how? And I want to experience something like that. I said, okay, well, we'll experience something like that at some point because you're adding energy to it right now. We're talking about it anyway. Fast forward, we're in New York City. we were spending some time together, and we split up for a few hours, and we're like, hey, let's check back in around, 8, and then we'll meet up. We'll meet up again. And so I was out doing my thing. She was doing her thing. I had no idea where she was. I was went somewhere completely different. And then at some point I could just feel, it was like, oh, it's time for us to connect. And then I remembered that she was excited and she felt inspired by this whole internal GPS being able to lead us anywhere. And in that memory, like maybe a minute after I started being in that vibrational field again, I literally just hit me. I pulled my phone out. I turned on my video camera, and I was just walking down a street, and I turned a corner. I pulled out my video camera. I hit record, and I turned the corner, and boom, she's right there in my face. And she was on the phone, and she was like, oh my God, what? And she was like, hold on. He's standing right in front of me. She was like, anyway.
That's so good, dude.
Yeah. And so that happened, like, as long as I kept appreciating it and telling that story, it just kept happening.
Yeah.
Like it just without any thought, without any use of my logical linear mind, just like a GPS in the car that says, go 500 feet, now turn right, now turn left. I have multiple stories like that.
Magical.
But yeah, man, I have all kinds of.
That's beautiful. So when you pulled out to record, was it in anticipation of running into her?
Both times I turned. Then I told another friend of mine that was coming to visit New York. I told her that story. She was like, "Get out of here! That's amazing!" And then I could feel that she too wanted to experience that. And so we were meeting up one day when she got into the city, and she was going to text and coordinate with me. And I said, just for fun, I said, just we'll just meet up. And she's like, well, what am I supposed to do? I said, just,
go where you feel.
Go where you feel to go. And she's like, Oren, you're crazy. She's like, okay, whatever. Anyway, same thing. I'm walking down the street.
What?
Walking down another street. This is New York City. It's massive.
Dude, yeah, that's the chances are not good.
not even remotely statistically good chances at all. And same thing. I got this overwhelming feeling right when I was approaching a stoplight in a corner, and I pulled out my phone and I turned on video, or I thought I turned it on video. And I turned the corner, and she's right in my face. Boom. And I hadn't had my phone out the whole time, but literally the intelligence, the information hit my body so clearly, so strong. I pulled out my phone, and it turns out I didn't have it on video camera. I had it on photo. I took a photo because her jaw dropped, and she was like, oh my God, what? Oren, you're crazy. And I took a picture of her, and we talked about it for hours probably afterwards. And I was just explaining to her that the thing is that intuitive information oftentimes comes to us in a more of like an abstraction, or like it's just like it gives us the next step, or it might be a feeling, or we have a sense, and then we make a decision, we take a step. And I think that that's a really, high functioning intuition. But what I was also sharing with her, which I'm sharing right now, is that there is a precision and order and structure that's immaculate. And the more we expand our consciousness and we're able to translate those frequencies, or be at one with them, then we can also experience more precision. Just like the GPS in a car, because it's information coming from a higher intelligence and higher perspective. But if we're in tune with it, it can also be very specific like that. But yeah, I'll stop right there, because I could tell stories all day long.
Dude, that's incredible. I love that story. And I love that you've sort of made that your thing to play with. And it's such a great example of co-creating with the universe in a playful way to sort of strengthen and validate this, knowing that there is this guidance system that's there, and the universe is waiting for us. Everyone listening, it's waiting for you to get more playful. It's waiting for you, to get excited in that state of childlike wonder, and to take the first step and let it help to, meet you halfway and fill in the gaps. And it reminds me a little bit of, I have a crazy ever unfolding story of synchronicity with my birthday. And it's the listeners have heard it a bunch of times. It's like a 10, 15 minute story that keeps growing, but it's because I've told this story of, I'm born on my dad's birthday and his grandmother, and it's on and on. And it just keeps expanding and expanding in magical ways. And it's just like, okay, I've approached it in such a playful, joyous way. The universe is like, oh, okay, there's momentum here. There's energy here. I can work with this. And that's really, it's such a great way to, figure out your own game of, okay, how can I start playing with the universe and start flexing my abilities to manifest? And I love it, man.
Totally. And the key, like you said, is play, because going back to these things that really open us up naturally to flow into our natural state. I said inspiration, emergency, falling in love, anything that basically kind of lets the self and all of its, kind of dissipate. Play does that as well. And that's why, like, it's not, doing something like this inner GPS system on that level of specificity is not something that I could ever do if I was trying to do it. Yeah. And the attitude is one of play. Like if she wasn't around the corner, it wouldn't matter. It'd be like, so what? I'm still the very fact that I even felt like she might be was already in it.
Wonderment.
Yeah. And that feeling in that moment is still occurring, even if she wasn't there. So I'm still experiencing the aliveness of my own intention. I'm still experiencing the play and the frequency of play and all of its life-giving energy, whether she showed up or not. So, and that's the thing, is to not get attached to like, oh, well, this is only going to be worth my time and energy if it works. I'm like, no, it's worth it because like I'm alive right now and I'm playing and I feel good and I'm receptive and I feel exceptional. And it's like, that's the prize. And so really, I think that when we can start to value on a more core level, things like inspiration and passion, being passionate for the sake of passion and inspired for the sake of inspiration and in play for the sake of play. Yep. And we genuinely start to value those things, then all these other things that come along with that, like manifestation, synchronicity, flow, just happen. I think if we start to like make it into a form, when we start to make it into a formula, it takes that element out of it. We're like, oh, well, I'm only valuing inspiration because, I know that if I'm in inspiration, my business is going to grow, or I'm going to be in flow, rather than, wait a minute, I like to be inspired because I'm connected to my true self. I feel alive. I'm connected to life. I'm inspired by inspiration itself. This is worth my presence and my time and my energy. This is worth it to me. This is valuable to me, period. If you read, then you really got some momentum, because inspiration will lead you into synchronicities and flow and, things well beyond your own orchestration.
Heaven, yes. I love it. And that's such a great way to wind this down, like to tie that back. Because at the beginning, we started this conversation with, okay, give me some examples outside of an emergency or, playing, being tackled on the football field. And that is the ultimate one, I feel, it is becoming childlike. It's like the one Bible verse that I will quote all the time: unless you become like a child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven.
The kingdom of heaven.
And
that's right.
That's what, that's where the magic is, becoming childlike, playing. And that's what we came here to do, is to live in that. We've been conditioned to stop being, creative and imaginative and childlike. But the good news is that inner child is there waiting for all of us to give it some attention, love, nurturing, so it can come out and show you its genius. And, children aren't pretending whatever they're pretending in an imaginative story in the backyard because they really need it to the pirate ship to show up, right? They're having the experience, regardless. Totally. And that's such a key point that you made. Oren, this has been incredible, my friend. I would like to ask you, what is, for those who want to connect, follow your work, what's the best way to do that? I know you also have an event coming up in Los Angeles, so maybe you can, now'd be a good time to kind of share those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is orenharris.com, ORENHARRIS.com. And I have a flow mastery video series on there for anybody who gets on my email list. I'm on Instagram at Oren Harris. I post probably 2 or 3 times a day, inspirational, transformational content, along with other cool stuff. So I'm pretty active on Instagram. I'm also Oren Harris on Facebook, and I do Facebook Lives. This is one of the ways that I contribute on Facebook. And they're totally spontaneous, inspired, just like this conversation. So I have a ton of those on my Facebook page. And my event, which I'm stoked about, it's called the O Experience. It's coming up in Los Angeles live on 11/11, which is also a powerful day, powerful number.
Yeah.
And it is, I purposely, Brandon, am not giving a lot of information about this event in terms of like, oh, these are the bullet points. This is what you're going to get, because part of my inspiration in this event is to invite us into a deeper level of resonance and knowing, and co-creation. But I will say that some of the essence of what will happen in this event is a ton of fun, a ton of play, improv, transformational games, exercises, connection. There'll be movement, there'll be music. I don't do a lot of events, but the events that I have done and that I do are always epic. So that would be an amazing opportunity to join me live in Los Angeles. I can provide you a link, or actually I can read the link. It's orenharris.com. And maybe you can put this in the show notes as well. orenharris.com/the O Experience.
Cool. Yeah. And if you could, maybe if you would go into, I just added you into our Facebook group, which is Positive Heads, by the way, with an S for anyone out there who's not in. And maybe you can post that in there when this actually comes out on Wednesday, I believe. I'll send you the links, and then maybe you can follow up with posting it so that people can kind of tie them together as they're hearing and connect. And I definitely am going to make it a point to see if I can, what is it? We're a couple months out from that. So, but you're not too far from me in LA. So I'm going to see if I can come and co-create some magic with you, my friend, because you are epic.
Thank you. Likewise. That would be amazing, man. I would really enjoy that.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, one last question for you. 60 seconds or less. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Oren Harris?
Ooh. Just
I like to be cliche. What can I say?
No, it's casual, simple question.
Yeah, no big deal.
The meaning of life. Wow, that's such a big question. It's like, in a way, life itself is the meaning of life, right? And I feel like we're all here learning, growing, expanding, and love. That's what sticks out to me. Love. Yeah. Love is the meaning of life, right? And joy is like one of the products of the expression of love.
Yeah. I love that. For me, I agree. It's like, it's all happening for love. In the end, when all the chess pieces go back in the box, they all go back in the same box, the pawns, the kings, the queens, the knights. It's like, it was all always happening for love.
For love.
Yeah. I love that answer. All right, 100%. My friend, this has been magical. You are a magic man, and thank you for sharing, connecting, growing. We'll have to do this again sometimes, and I'm confident I'll see you in 3D sooner than later. I'm going to set the intention to come out to Los Angeles as that gets closer, and if not there for some reason, I'm sure we'll cross paths soon. So thank you for being.
Awesome, brother. Yes, thank you too, man. I really, really enjoyed it. I appreciate you.
Until next time, journey well.
All right. Take care.
Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. If you have enjoyed this positive download from our hearts and minds to yours, please take a minute, give us a rating or review on iTunes. Since iTunes is the holy grail of all things podcasting, your good reviews help us to reach more listeners. Also, we would be extremely appreciative if you would tell your friends and family about the show. Our sincere intent with the Positive Head podcast is to spread positivity to the world because we're selfish, quite honestly. I say that jokingly, but really only halfway joking. I'm referring to the good kind of selfish based on the knowing that we all get what we give in this life, because when we give, we're actually always giving to extensions of self, since we're all really one in the same consciousness, just in different bodies. So if you want to be a good selfish along with us by helping to spread the positivity, by all means, please proceed to shout about the Positive Head podcast from your rooftop. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.